We set up here. We'll see how many people are joining us live and how many people will catch the replay. Okay, so we are live here in our Move Fully Nourished group. I'm Ashley Anderson, registered dietitian and personal trainer and founder of Move Fully Nourished. And today we have a very special guest joining us. We have Kelly Murray. She is a pediatric and adult sleep consultant. And we have the honor of really learning about one of those topics that I hear all the time from my clients is how do I get better sleep? So Kelly, first tell us a little bit about you. How did you first get involved in becoming a sleep consultant?
Yes, that's a great question. It's actually very ironic that I'm a sleep consultant because I started with pediatric sleep. And I was of the thought that sleep training was evil. It was something I never wanted to do with my children because I didn't want them to ever cry. So I ended up, my daughter was just an amazing sleeper. She's just one of those kids that still today, she just loves to sleep. I was able to rock her to sleep, put her down, she slept through the night, no problem. My son, my second, on the other hand, he wasn't so easy. I got into a situation where I was feeding him to sleep, and then he needed to be fed in between every sleep cycle. Sleep cycle is about 90 minutes. So I was up every 90 minutes feeding him. And it went on for about 9 months until my pediatrician intervened and said, all right, something needs to stop here. You guys both look extremely exhausted.
I
So
bet.
luckily, he sat me down and educated me on, the perceived risks of your child crying during sleep training, and that, the studies to show that it's damaging really can't be compared to sleep training because those studies were on babies who are in orphanages
Mm,
or situations of severe abuse and neglect. These
mm.
studies show that crying is detrimental to attachment and neurological development. So you really can't compare it to sleep training. Then he talked to me about the importance of sleep. So I got my buy-in. I went home and did research, and I found this wonderful program that allowed me to be in the room with him as he learned to fall asleep. And it worked like magic. Within 3 days, he was falling asleep, sleeping through the night, and our lives changed for the better. So I decided to become certified to help other parents through the process. And
Amazing.
yeah, so it started with kids, and then fast forward about a year later, I was having issues sleeping, which is really ironic. How can you be a sleep consultant when you're not sleeping yourself? So I enlisted the help of an adult sleep consultant. And again, it was a completely life changing process. So I decided to become certified in adults too, so that I can help everyone of every age get the sleep they need to be their best.
Yeah, so amazing. So, and kind of in the history that you've gone through is just feeling like at first the perception was, okay, if I let my child cry, then, maybe I'm not doing everything I can to give them that care. But like you said, and seeing that research and the studies, that it really isn't the neglect, it's the strategies that help to really create that healthy environment. So you get the rest, you get the sleep that you need, and so does your child. So you guys have better energy in the day. And I know we'll kind of get into this as we talk, but it's just kind of amazing to see how the more research we do and the more that we study a topic that interests us, how much we learn and how we can broaden our horizons with just the details of the topic itself.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think I really needed the research explained to me. My background is in medical sales, so I'm very research driven. And before becoming a sleep consultant, I worked at Medela, the breast pump company.
Oh,
And I think through my interactions with lactation consultants, I lean more towards that attachment parenting philosophy, which I still believe that there's a lot of great things that are taught with attachment parenting. However, if your child isn't sleeping well, you really, and it's affecting your family, if it's affecting your emotional well being, your physical health, their development, their mood, then you really need to do something about it. And
yeah.
it's
So you
not
bring up,
going to be detrimental. And it's a shame that misinformation is out there, and it scares, a lot of mothers from doing sleep training and taking a hold of their child's sleep habits, and teaching them this new skill, because it's really just teaching them a skill that they're capable of learning, just like walking, crawling, rolling. It's a skill that they need to learn. And some kids, it just doesn't come easily. There's a little assistance that you need to give.
yeah. So I love how, even in starting to talk a little about your experience with your family, how did it change the dynamic of your days with your family in the evenings and during the days when you discovered the sleep training protocol and how it impacted everybody in your family.
Yeah, so before I decided to sleep train, I was just a zombie. I had not only my son to take care of, but also my daughter, who was a toddler. And although I felt like I was fulfilling all of my son's needs, dealing with a toddler is completely different than dealing with a baby. You can't really be on autopilot. It's not, feed, sleep, change their diaper. She was really, when the terrible twos really testing me. So I had so much more patience once I was getting better sleep. And also my relationship with my husband improved. I was very resentful before we started sleep training because I was the one that was dealing with all of the night wakings. And, he was trying to convince me just to let him cry it out. That's something I know I wouldn't have been able to have done anyway, but my husband wouldn't help me because he's like, well, you're not, helping yourself. You're not helping the situation.
So
So
kind of in the difference of opinions there too, and just trying to learn about really the what was going to be the best fit for you. So what I'm assuming, and maybe you'll get into this too, is there are different types of sleep training. Like you mentioned, one is actually being in the room with the child, but then also as an adult, when you're trying to sleep train yourself or learn from someone like yourself as a sleep consultant, there's a lot of different strategies. I would assume there's a difference between.
yes, it's a lot more complex when it comes to adults. There's a lot more different factors at play, both physical as well as mental. And it's all about figuring out, okay, what is it exactly that's preventing you from getting a good night's sleep? And it's usually not just one thing, it's usually a multitude of factors.
Right, right. We always talk with my one-on-one coaching clients about stress and how stress impacts everything, and then kind of that vicious circle of sleep, stress more, sleep less, and how that ultimately impacts your mood, your quality of life, and just overall how much joy you have on a typical day. So, kind of like bridging off of that topic, really, why is it so important for us to get good quality sleep? What are the benefits of sleep?
Yeah, sleep isn't just about restoration of energy. Yes, that's a big component, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes when we sleep. And we don't even know the tenth of it. There's research going on, I'm sure today, that is focusing on why we actually sleep. But just to give you a brief overview of some of the benefits. So, when it comes to our physical health, when we're sleeping, our body's releasing growth hormone. 75% of growth hormone is released while we sleep. So, our tissue and cells and bones are being repaired while we sleep. Also, in terms of our immunity, when we're sleeping, our body is releasing those immune components like cytokines, which are proteins that help to reduce inflammation, white blood cells, T cells. So it helps to fight infection, inflammation, bacteria, and disease. There's one research study to show that adults who sleep less than 7 hours per night, if they're inoculated with a flu virus, they're 3 times more likely to develop symptoms than adults who sleep more than 7 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that
Makes a lot of
vaccines
sense.
are 11 times more effective after a good night's sleep. So, really important for physical health, for our cognition while we're sleeping. Our brain's taking information from our short-term memory and moving it into our long-term memory and forming memories. Also, our brain's doing what I like to call a reboot. So it's clearing out toxins and plaque while we sleep. There's a link
Mm-hmm.
between sleep deprivation and Alzheimer's due to the plaque buildup that happens if you're not sleeping well. And then last but not least, our emotional health. When we're not sleeping, our body thinks that there must be some sort of threat because it's not natural for us to be sleep deprived. So our body thinks, oh, there must be some sort of danger present or else we would be sleeping. So what the body does, it's oh so smart. It turns the amygdala on, which is the portion of the brain that regulates our fear response. It turns it on to overdrive so that any little tiny stressor is perceived as a big deal. That way we'll have a strong reaction in order to defend ourselves. So that's why when I wasn't sleeping, when my son was up every hour on the hour, I had such a short fuse.
Mm-hmm. I
My
bet a lot of people can
amygdala,
relate to
my
that.
amygdala was on fire. It was just just ready to pounce on any little tiny stressor.
Yeah, and I bet a lot of people can relate to that last one, especially because when you're trying to deal with fatigue and a boss and a job plus kids, and you're trying to deal with all these different dynamics of life, and just feeling like that fuse is so short, it's difficult to manage all of that and to be able to have emotional stability and to be able to respond with the clearest mental space possible when you are extremely fatigued. So you bring up excellent points. Sleep as a detoxifying agent, sleep as a way to really bridge that gap into the growth phase, so that hormonal release, and also really being able, and what I talk to my clients about too, is when you exercise and you need to repair your muscles, as you mentioned, it's so, so important to get stronger, to build strength, to get that quality sleep. And many times people will say, well, actually, like, I feel fine on 6 hours of sleep a night. And I'm like, really? If you look at the studies, you'll look at the research, we need at least that 7. So super important. I'm so glad that you touched base on all those points. And something I think for people to even recognize that there's not just one piece of it. It's not just how you feel, it's internally how it's impacting the quality of your home, your body, your one home to live in.
Right, right. And something your community may be interested in too is if you're not getting good sleep, it affects your metabolism
Yes.
because your body doesn't want to burn energy as quickly because again your body thinks that there must be some sort of danger, and so it
Mm-hmm.
slows your metabolism. So if you're trying to get healthier, maybe lose weight, it's going to be counterproductive to not get enough sleep. It's going to make
Yeah,
it so much harder.
another great point too. And another topic we talk about a lot too is cravings, and how, like, even as you mentioned with that short fuse, sometimes we feel like with that lack of dopamine response, because again, hormones are all over the place when we don't get that quality sleep, and you're reaching for those carbohydrates because they can give you that quick fix of that dopamine response in the brain, but it's not long lasting until you feel like you need that hit of dopamine again. So excellent points, and just really to help people relate to the reasons why sleep is important. Now you started to talk a little bit about the hours here, so less than 7 hours. Tell us a little bit more about the duration, 7 to 9, or like where is it in terms of what's considered gold standard for the hours of sleep per night.
Yeah, so it's definitely individual. The National Sleep Foundation, they're the thought leaders in all things sleep in the United States. They recommend somewhere between 7 to 9 hours. However, insomniacs, what we're finding through current research, typically only need 6 hours.
Mm,
And that's one of the reasons why I find some of my clients have issues with sleep is because they're under this perception that they need 8 hours of sleep. So they're
mm,
going to bed 8 hours before they need to wake up, and they don't have enough what we call sleep pressure, which is a buildup of this chemical called adenosine that connects to neurons in our brains and makes us really sleepy. They don't have enough of this adenosine in their system to help them get through the night. So then they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a couple hours until their body can rebuild those levels and fall back to sleep.
Hmm. Well, that's really
So,
interesting. I didn't know that about those who have chronic sleep deprivation, and so that 6 hours of time space. There's also something I was going to ask you kind of within that, and we may touch on this, or you may have already something that you're going to talk about. But when looking at the go to bed and wake up cycles, I've had some people, and obviously in your experience too, where they feel much, much better going to bed earlier and getting that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and some people feel much, much better. Their rhythm works on going to bed at midnight and waking up much later. So in kind of looking at that is the time frame that you're talking about, and then adding that layer here, how would you kind of maybe make that, or have you looked at any data that speaks towards time frame? Because sometimes we hear about like never go to bed after midnight, like those phrases that you tend to pick up in social media or and Google.
yeah, again, it's all individualized. So, Michael Bruce, or Dr. Michael Bruce, he's a thought leader in the area of sleep medicine. He has identified 4 different chronotypes. So, a chronotype is your biological rhythm, and he's named these chronotypes based off of animals. So
Hmm.
the four chronotypes that he's identified are your lions. So those are your early birds that are exhausted in the evening and like to wake up early. They wake up early naturally. So that's about 15% of the population. So it's not many of us. But some people, that's what their body clock is geared towards. And the reason why we have all these different chronotypes is if you think about it back in the days when we lived in tribes, you need people to be
Hmm.
awake and watching what would you call it, little village.
Yeah, watching for danger, right? Like
Yeah,
so
watching
that.
for danger 24 hours a day. So it's really, it's natural that we all have different body clocks. So we have our lions. So it sounds like you're a lion, and those are our king of the jungles. Those are very successful entrepreneurial type of people who early to bed, early to rise. And then there's what we call the bears. So those are pretty much 50% of the population. So those are the folks that typically wake up around 7 naturally, go to bed around 11.
Mhm.
Their body clock is based on the sun. They have this propensity to go to sleep, soon after sunset and then wake up after sunrise. Those are the bears. And then there's what
So
we
that'd be
call
like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
so, Dr. Bruce recommends that the bears go to bed around 11 and wake up at 7, but there's
Oh, 11 to
variability.
7.
Maybe if they have to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, they should go to bed at 10. So they have
Mhm.
a very high sleep need. Those are the individuals that can't function on less than 8 hours of sleep. And then we have our wolves. The wolves are folks who have a later chronotype. So they like to go to bed later and wake up later. Those are typically your creative
Mhm.
individuals.
Mhm.
And then last but not least, the dolphins. The dolphins are your classic insomniacs. They have a very low sleep drive. They can really get by on 6 hours of sleep. They probably can't sleep much more than that because their brain is so active. Dolphins sleep with only one side of their brain turned off and the other side's on. So he likes to
Interesting.
compare these individuals to dolphins because their brain is always active. So they tend to wake up in the middle of the night and their brain's flooded with thoughts and they have issues falling back to sleep. So those are the individuals that really need to make sure that they're consolidating their night so that they're not spending too much time in bed. That way they can get that full night's sleep.
Wow, that's so interesting. And every single one you just pointed out, I can pinpoint a client or a friend or family member or somebody who can fit into each of those categories. And so that's interesting that you say about the dolphins. I didn't know that they only slept partially with half their brain turned off and half their brain turned on. So
Yeah.
they're like creative and they're all of the above.
Yes, those are the people who are perfectionists. They're very neurotic. They're very go, 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 go. They have a hard time, settling and calming their
Mm.
minds.
I think I
And they're usually
transitioned from a
very
dolphin to a
successful
lion.
people because they are so driven, and they're always on.
Very, very interesting. So when looking at these four different, did you call them prototypes or what's the name? Four different
It is a chronotype.
chronotype, right? Prototype,
Yeah, so it's like
what
your
word?
biological rhythm, your propensity towards a certain rhythm.
So when looking at these different types, do you ever see people switch categories? Like where they start off as one and then change to another?
Yeah, so Dr. Bruce says that you can change categories throughout your life. So you may be a dolphin when you're in mid-age, when you have lots on your plate, but then as you get older, you may lean more towards a lion. So you
Hmm.
can move in and out of different chronotypes.
That makes a lot of sense. So if you're looking at these different types and now looking more at sleep issues, what would you say are some of the main causes of maybe fitting into each category, or the main causes of really sleep issues that people have?
Yeah, so as we talked about before, a lot of people are under the perception that they need more sleep than they really do. And so what
Mm.
happens after a bad night of sleep, they'll go to bed really early to make up for that bad night of sleep, and they haven't developed enough sleep pressure. And so then they're up again for another 2 hours, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So that's issue number one. It's just spending way too much time in bed. And then your brain actually associates your bed with being awake instead of being
Mm.
asleep. Also, stress, as we talked about, it's a huge one. If you're
Mhm.
under physical or mental stress, what happens is your body responds by producing cortisol, the alert hormone.
Hmm.
And cortisol is actually not a bad thing. I think that it gets a bad rap. We actually need cortisol in our system to keep us alert, to help us react strongly if there's danger, to help lower our blood pressure, our blood sugar. It's just when you have way too much cortisol in your system, it's difficult for those levels to fall to a point in the evening to allow you to get enough good enough night's sleep, because the other hormone that controls our sleep awake cycle is called melatonin. And so melatonin counteracts the cortisol. And so your cortisol levels are supposed to go down at night and stay low, and melatonin rises. But if you're stressed all day and your cortisol levels are elevated when you go to bed, you might be able to fall asleep because you have that sleep pressure working in your favor and melatonin. But as the night goes on, that sleep pressure declines, your melatonin starts to decline, and cortisol naturally increases. And then you're up in the middle of the
Yeah.
night.
Right, right. I hear that all the time with my clients. A lot of people, they can get asleep, but they have a hard time staying asleep. And so we talk about that too, that their stress resilience during the day, and oftentimes talk about, I'm so glad you just brought that up with the melatonin. And in describing, I'm glad too, I'm on point here with what you're talking about. In describing, we want that natural circadian rhythm to help again with the melatonin release in the evening time, and then the cortisol to wake you up to be released in the morning time, to have those both ends of that spectrum. So oftentimes when we talk about stress reduction, the biggest one is to help to ignite the parasympathetic nervous system during the day. And so we often talk about that with our one-on-one coaching clients, because they want to be able to bring those daytime cortisol levels, especially kind of later afternoon time, down so that the melatonin has a fighting chance here to really help their bodies get more into that rhythm.
Yes, yes,
Super,
it's
super
so
interesting.
important. So there's, tons of little mental hacks that you can use, such as deep breathing. I have a lot of my clients who have back-to-back meetings throughout the day. I ask them just to commit to 30 seconds of deep breathing after every meeting. And
Hmm.
research shows that engaging in deep breathing lowers your cortisol levels. And if they can, take a couple breaks throughout the day, go for a walk, stretch, meditate, talk on the phone with a friend, do something that makes you feel good and helps you to unwind. Because
Hmm.
a lot of people think that if they can just spend an hour, 2 hours in the evening unwinding, that that's good enough. But a lot of times it isn't, especially if you're under a lot of stress.
Right, right. So it's building up over the course of the day and kind of like adding pennies to your piggy bank. And if you just try to kind of flush it all at once, you're not going to really get that built up over time. It's going to be much more beneficial to do it spread out throughout the day, is kind of what you're alluding to here.
Yes, yes, to keep
Yeah.
your cortisol levels in check throughout the day.
Yeah.
And there are
Awesome.
things you can do in the morning to make sure your cortisol levels are rising in the morning, because as they rise, there's going to be that rebound effect.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then it will lower throughout the day.
I have a client of mine that has a light alarm clock. So
Oh,
like the
yeah.
light, let's start to like go off at, if it's like 6 o'clock, and of course the time change depends on when it gets light now, but then it starts to get lighter gradually. So they start to feel like the sun is rising. And so I thought that's a really nice natural way to get the cortisol levels to rise early on in the morning time.
Yes, yes, I love those clocks. Another thing you could do too is just go outside soon after you wake up. So research shows that if we can go outside for 2 to 10 minutes in the morning,
Mm,
that helps to kickstart your cortisol levels, because that's why one trigger of cortisol is sunlight. Actually, the main trigger, when our eyes detect that there's sunlight, that sends a signal to our glands to suppress melatonin and start to produce
mhm.
cortisol.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good tip too. And thinking about, well, now as it's starting to get nicer outside and the weather's starting to change, you have an opportunity to feel more comfortable going outside without feeling like a blast of cold air. So in
Yeah,
thinking
even
about, we just,
in winter, I go outside. I bundle myself up. I take my kids to school, and I keep my warm coat on, my mittens, and everything. And I go outside and I drink my coffee. And so I get a
ah,
double dose of alertness through the caffeine as well as the cortisol.
there you go. Great example. So in kind of what we talked about before is the little sunrise alarm clock and kind of thinking about the environment and setting your environment up for success, how do you turn your room into a sleep sanctuary?
Mhm. Yeah, so the perfect room would resemble a little cave. You want it to be dark, cool, and quiet. So, as I mentioned before, when our eyes detect that there's light, that sends a signal to our brain to release cortisol and suppress melatonin. And even a small amount of light can confuse your brain because the neurons in our eyes, they're actually part of our brain. They're more sensitive to light in the evening hours.
Mm.
So you want your room to be as pitch black as possible. I recommend covering your windows if there's a lot of external light. Where I live, I have a street light right in front of my house. And so we have our windows completely covered with material. There's this company that I love called Easy Blackout Window Covers. And
Mm.
what it is, it's vinyl that you can cut to the size of your window and you adhere it to the frame with double-sided Velcro. So that's a nice, easy way
Oh.
to block out all the lights. Definitely recommend those for babies because they're ultra sensitive to light. You can wear a sleep mask. Cover the little tiny LEDs with stickers. I want to see if I have them laying around. But there's these little stickers that you can buy in all different shapes and sizes, and you can put them on your LED lights that indicate that a device is connected to power.
Mm.
So that takes care of the darkness. You want it to be nice and cool because our body temperature has to lower by 2 degrees in order to fall asleep. So you want to make sure that you're sleeping in natural fibers. So aim to purchase sheets that are made of organic cotton, linen, because those fibers not only insulate, but they're also very breathable.
Mhm.
Also, when looking for a mattress, look for natural fibers. A lot of mattresses are made of wool, which is really great for thermal regulation. There's
Mm.
also research to show that if you sleep in between wool, so a mattress topper made of wool and a duvet made of wool, that it actually improves your sleep efficiency by 25%.
Whoa.
Because it's really good for thermal regulation. We have a wool mattress topper and duvet, and my husband runs hot in the middle of the night. And ever since we purchased it, he says that he never wakes up in the middle of the night sweating anymore. So it's really nice, especially if if you have a spouse or a partner and you have two different temperature preferences at night. You also want to make
Definitely.
sure that you
Definitely.
lower your thermostat. The ideal sleeping temperature is around 65 degrees. And then last but not least, if you have a partner who snores, I recommend turning on a sound machine or wearing earplugs. Bose actually came out with this new device that I've been trialing. They're called sleep pods. And they're just like AirPods, but they're super comfy because they're made of silicone. And they basically just play white noise throughout the entire night and they block out all sounds. And so I
Oh,
really like them. They're very effective at blocking out the noise because my husband snores, and I usually wake up about 3 times in the middle of the night to tell him to roll over. And they're really good at blocking out the noise. I just don't know how comfortable they are. I have really sensitive ears, so some nights they don't bother me, and other nights they do. But that's another good option to look into. And then you could do things like diffuse essential oils or use a pillow spray because our sense of smell is very powerful in evoking emotions. I'm
mhm.
sure that everyone can relate to that you smell a certain scent and it brings you back to maybe your grandma's house, perhaps fresh baked cookies. I know there's a certain hairspray that I smell and it reminds me of high school. So
All
using
the 80s style hair, you know?
yeah, that oxy, whatever it's called. But your sense of smell is really powerful. So look for scents like lavender, chamomile, any of the woodsy scents, such as vetiver, sandalwood, cedar wood. So that's another way to make sure that your environment is nice and relaxing. And then last but not least, clean your room, just like your mom told you. If your room's a mess and you have clutter and paperwork, then your brain isn't going to be able to turn off because a cluttered room equals a cluttered brain.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily think about that last one, but I love the idea of just making sure that your space is also as relaxing as you want to feel.
Yeah.
So now in kind of the differences, like we talked about those those chronotypes before is falling asleep and then staying asleep. So, in terms of tips on falling asleep more quickly, is there anything you'd add to what you already discussed?
Yeah, so one thing that's really important when it comes to having the ability to fall asleep quickly is to make sure that you have a very consistent and relaxing bedtime routine. So, bedtime routines aren't just for babies, it's important for adults to wind down too. So, I know everyone loves to watch television at night, I do too, but after you watch TV, if you can spend just like a half hour without being exposed to screens and doing something nice and relaxing and preparing yourself from a hygiene perspective as well as a mental cool down perspective for sleep, you're going to be able to fall asleep much faster. So I always
Mhm.
recommend for folks who have a hard time falling asleep to take a bath before they go to bed. And if they want extra credit points, they can put some Epsom salts in their bath because Epsom salts contain magnesium, and magnesium helps our brain and our bodies to relax. And what the
Mhm.
bath does is it heats your body up, but as soon as you get out of the bath, then your body is going to cool down, and that's going to help to facilitate the falling asleep process. Because as I mentioned before, our body temperature has to lower by 2 degrees in order to fall asleep. And then once you get ready for bed, do something enjoyable that doesn't entail using a screen. You can stretch. There's lots of great like stretching YouTube videos you can play in the background as as you try to unwind. Maybe listen to a guided meditation, only if you're not going to fall asleep, because if you fall asleep, you don't want to fall asleep and then try to go to bed because it might be even harder to fall asleep. Listen to a podcast, a book on tape, or just good old fashioned read by candlelight or a very faint light. And then make sure that you don't go to bed until you actually feel tired. You should
Mhm.
feel like sleep is starting to overtake your body. So I think some people, like we talked about before, they go to bed too early and then they struggle falling asleep because they begin to stress. It's really interesting. This actually happened to my daughter recently. It was taking her forever to fall asleep, and I thought it was just boundary pushing. And so I finally decided to try moving her bedtime later by just 30 minutes. And now she's falling asleep within 10 minutes. Whereas before, she was going to bed 30 minutes earlier, but it was taking her an hour, hour and a half to fall asleep because I think she was laying there in bed and couldn't sleep and started to become
Yeah.
stressed out, and that cortisol started to pump.
Man, I wish I had you when I was a child. I struggled with sleep all my life until most recently. So that, I mean, it makes sense because you get into bed thinking like this is the time when I have to wind down, or I've had a really hard day and I just want to like stump. But that relaxation part or that wind down routine is just as essential as it is for children. I talk about that with my one-on-one clients as well. It's like, what do you do, or what did you do with your kids when they were little? Oh, I bathed them, I read them a story, I tucked them in, I told them I loved. I'm like, so you need that for you. Now, what does the adult version of that look like? So I think these are just excellent tips and just bringing up some really great points and making sure that you are ready to go to sleep, but that you're doing all these other things that you mentioned. So you're not exposed to the lights, so that you're not looking at a screen, so that you're not delaying that wind down or that relaxation phase to allow your body to actually get to that position where you do feel tired enough to fall asleep.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. It's not an on off process like we would like it to be.
And then now, kind of like with staying asleep. So, tips on actually, if people don't have issues, I hear a lot, okay, I can fall asleep, but I have a hard time staying asleep. So, kind of some tips on that.
Yeah, so the one thing I would do is I would take a look at the amount of time you're sleeping versus the amount of time you're in bed. And so, say you're only sleeping for 6 hours, but you're in bed for 8 hours, then
Mm,
what you should do is you should try to go to bed 6 hours before you typically wake up.
mm,
And what will happen is you're going to be a little more sleep deprived, and it might be hard to stay awake a little later. But what that does, it builds up some more sleep pressure, and then it will help your body to consolidate sleep. And then once you start sleeping through the night, you can slowly move your bedtime up a little earlier by 15-minute increments until you find that sweet spot where you're not struggling to stay awake and you feel rested when you wake up in the morning, but you're still getting consolidated sleep, because sleep quality matters more than the total hours of sleep.
mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That
A
would be
great
my
point.
number one recommendation. Another thing would be when you are laying in bed, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're having trouble falling back to sleep, get out of bed. Because by laying in bed and working on falling asleep, it's counterproductive. You can't force yourself to fall asleep, it just has to happen. And then what happens is your brain starts to associate your bed with being awake in the middle of the night and stressing and worrying. So it's better just to get out of bed if it's been a good, 15, 20 minutes, you still can't sleep, and do something relaxing. You can engage in some deep breathing or meditation or read a book. So whenever I have a bad night's sleep, I try to tell myself, oh, well, this is kind of cool. I get to wake up and read a book for a little bit. When do I ever get to read a book by myself? So just try to look at it as something that's not undesirable,
Mm-hmm.
and put the switch in your brain so that you don't start to stress out that you're awake, and say, okay, what can I do that's enjoyable? That doesn't, of course, involve a screen. You want to stay away
Mm-hmm.
from screens again because of the light that they emit. But then once you start again feeling like you're going to fall asleep, you feel sleep tapping on your shoulder, that's when you hop back in bed. And they call it, it's a technique that psychologists use. It's part of like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and they
Mm-hmm.
call it stimulus control. Again, by training your brain that when you're in bed, you're sleeping, it will help you to get a better night's sleep. Because if your brain associates your bed with being awake again and stressing out, then you're going to continue to wake up and stress out. So that's why it's so important to get out of bed, even though it's hard to do that because you're still tired. It's going to help in the long run for that
Yeah.
disassociation.
I love that you brought up that stress response. A lot of times in Move Fully Nourished, we talk a lot about where your mind goes, energy flows. And if you wake up and you're so frustrated, I'm never going to get to sleep. I'm not a good sleeper. You're constantly repeating those thoughts in your head. You're not going to fall asleep because you're almost like convincing yourself and pulling yourself in the other direction to continuously have bad sleep. So I love that you said that is doing something positive, doing something that, hey, this is an opportunity where I don't normally get to read by myself and have quiet 20 minutes here, and just looking at it from a very positive light, because then it makes that time a lot less stressful, which again, as you said before, is at that time we want the cortisol levels to be down. So we don't want a boost of cortisol right when you're trying to really fall asleep, because you're not going to fall asleep as that melatonin is struggling to have its fighting chance. So I love that you just brought that up too. We do have a couple questions if you don't mind
Yeah,
answering
sure.
them. So question one is, this is from Lori. She said, I must be a dolphin. Kelly mentioned that chronotypes can be changed as someone ages. Can someone change their own chronotype to try to get more sleep?
Unfortunately, it's better just to embrace your chronotype. That way, you're going to bed at the appropriate times and getting enough sleep. You're taking advantage of your natural ebb and flow of cortisol and melatonin. And then, hey, once you start sleeping better, maybe your chronotype will naturally change.
I love that too. And then from Lori again, she said, what are the wool linens that Kelly mentioned? Where did you find that's the specific brand that you guys use?
So I love this brand called You Are What You Sleep. And if you head to my website, Kelly Murray Adult Sleep, and click on blog, I actually just wrote a blog post all about why thermal regulation is so important for sleep. And there's a link to the company that I mentioned, and also a code. I think it's for 15% off. So go to my website so that you can get a little discount. They're definitely an investment, but they're worth it. They last longer than down linens.
Mm-hmm.
They're more durable. They also sell pillows, and they say that wool is resistant to mites. Kind of like
Ah,
dust mites in our pillows, and you have to change them. I guess
mm-hmm.
wool is resistant to that because mites do not like wool. So although it's an investment, I mean, it's an investment in your sleep, but then
Right.
also they're going to be more durable than your cotton or down linens. And
Awesome.
let's face it, down isn't the most humane thing. I hate to think about how they collect those down feathers. And then wool alternatives are typically made of crude oil, which is, or sorry, not wool, down alternatives are made of crude oil, which of course, that's not good for our environment.
I didn't actually know that. Wow, you know something about the environment I don't. I love that. I'm going to now look up all the different things about sheets and pillows and all that. That's great. And I will definitely put all your information up on the post with this so they can access the website, get to get in contact with you. But kind of before we move that direction, you had one more question that I was going to ask you is what are some natural alternatives to sleeping pills? I do have some clients who are on sleep aids that they were prescribed from their doctor, and it's something that we're working on trying to pull back from or decrease the dosage. So learning a little bit about some alternatives would be fantastic.
Yes, yes. So I'm really loving CBD recently. And I know it sounds like a fad, but there's actually science behind it. So we have what's called an endocannabinoid system. So it's a system just like our respiratory system, our digestive system, our reproductive system. And what this system is responsible for is maintaining balance in your body. So it controls things like our mood, our appetite, and also our circadian rhythm. And what happens is over time, this system begins to wear out. Our bodies produce endocannabinoids, and these endocannabinoids attach to receptors throughout our body and keep everything in balance. And as I mentioned, over time, these endocannabinoids start to decline, and also stress decreases the amount of endocannabinoids you have in your system. So by using CBD supplements those natural occurring endocannabinoids and helps everything stay in balance. And there's a lot of great research that's coming out these days to show that CBD supplementation helps to improve sleep and decrease anxiety and depression. And if you have those mental conditions, it's going to impact your sleep.
On
Well,
your website, do you also have a link to a high quality CBD oil?
yes, yes. So I
Okay.
have an article all about CBD, and I have a link to a company that I love called Equilibria. They're a
Mm.
Chicago-based female-owned company, and the thing I love about this company is they actually have a free dosing specialist that you have access to. So you can set
Ah,
an appointment with somebody who's educated in dosing CBD, and you can
yeah,
talk to
it's
them
important.
about your symptoms, when the symptoms occur, and they'll tell you exactly when and how much to take.
Wow, that's awesome. And to have someone, again, with that educational background who is also research based and as a local company is always great to be able to promote someone who's local. So, Kelly, thank you so much for being on live today and joining me. Really appreciate your time and would love to first ask you the kind of the ending and the closure here is how can people get in touch with you best and how can they start working with you?
Yes, absolutely. So they can head to my website. It's Kelly Murray Adult Sleep. And you can learn more about me. There's tons of great blogs. They go into more detail into the information that I just discussed today. And if you're interested in working one on one, you can set up a free 30-minute discovery call where I get to know more about your situation, what you've tried, and I can talk to you about different packages that may be a good fit for your personal situation with sleep.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll put all that information up on here, like I said, with this post. Feel free to check out Kelly. And if you guys have any other further questions, keep posting them in this direct link. I'll make sure to get the questions to Kelly and then make sure that you guys have her contact information so you can schedule that discovery call. We all know how important sleep is now, and just starting to change your habits and your sleep patterns now will better you for the rest of your life. So it's so important to get a handle on it now. And Kelly's a true professional. It's been great to have her on today. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye now.